The morning my ex-wife was supposed to marry another man, she called me before sunrise. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful, yet it carried the weight of years that neither of us had truly escaped. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She simply asked one question that stopped time inside my chest. She asked if I wanted to relive our memories before she walked toward a new future. I stared through the window as the first rays of daylight painted the streets gold, wondering why someone who had already let go would ask the man she once left behind to spend one last day revisiting a love that had already become history. Some wounds never completely disappear. They simply learn to sleep until one unexpected sentence wakes them again. Before we continue this emotional journey, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us whether you believe kindness deserves a second chance, share this story with someone who still believes in love, and subscribe to Heartline Stories for more unforgettable emotional journeys that stay with you long after the story ends. My name is Rowan Mercer, and I had spent the last 4 years convincing everyone, including myself, that I had moved on. My apartment overlooked a quiet park where children laughed every afternoon, elderly couples fed birds together, and young families created memories I secretly envied. My days had become predictable. I repaired antique furniture, restored forgotten pieces of history, and somehow found comfort in giving broken things another chance. Maybe that was why I loved woodworking so much. Wood never lied. It showed every scar proudly. It cracked under pressure but could still become beautiful again. Human hearts were not nearly as simple. My marriage with Maris Vale had lasted 9 years before quietly collapsing under the weight of misunderstandings, endless work, and the silent grief of losing the baby we had dreamed about for so long. Neither of us cheated. Neither of us screamed. There were no dramatic betrayals. We simply became strangers sharing the same roof while pretending everything was fine. Some endings arrive with explosions. Ours arrived like winter, slowly freezing every conversation until there was nothing left to save. The divorce papers carried fewer words than the vows we once exchanged, yet they somehow changed everything. When Maris called that morning, I almost ignored the phone. Her number had disappeared from my screen years ago. I had deleted every contact, every message, every photograph because I believed forgetting was the only way to survive. Yet somehow I recognized her voice before she even said her name. She explained that her wedding would begin at sunset. Before then, she wanted to visit the places where our story had begun and ended. She said she wanted to close every chapter honestly before opening another. She told me I was free to refuse. I should have refused. Every sensible thought inside my mind begged me to hang up. Instead, I heard myself agreeing. An hour later, I found her waiting beside the old riverside cafe where we had shared our first breakfast together nearly 14 years earlier. She wore a simple cream-colored dress instead of a wedding gown, and her hair moved gently in the summer breeze exactly as I remembered. Time had added quiet confidence to her face, but her smile remained painfully familiar. For a moment it felt as though the divorce had never happened. Then I noticed the engagement ring sparkling beneath the morning sun, reminding me that this day did not belong to us anymore. Neither of us rushed into conversation. We ordered coffee from the same elderly owner who surprisingly recognized us despite the passing years. He smiled warmly, assuming we were celebrating another anniversary. Neither of us corrected him. Sometimes strangers unknowingly offer the kindest gifts by believing happy endings still exist. We sat near the window watching cyclists pass by while silence spoke louder than words ever could. I realized memories are strange companions. They never ask permission before returning. As the hours passed, we visited the small bookstore where we had hidden from a thunderstorm during our second date. We walked through the botanical garden where I had proposed beneath blooming cherry trees during an unusually warm spring afternoon. We laughed remembering how I had accidentally dropped the engagement ring into a flower bed before finding it 20 minutes later with muddy hands and a terrified heart. The laughter surprised both of us. It sounded older, softer, and somehow kinder than before. By midday, Sunlight filled every street with warmth, making the city feel alive. Families gathered in parks. Street musicians played cheerful melodies. Children chased bubbles across open squares. Everything around us celebrated ordinary happiness while we quietly carried extraordinary memories through places that had once belonged entirely to us. I realized grief changes shape over time. At first it feels like drowning. Later it becomes something you simply learn to carry. Maris admitted she had almost cancelled the wedding several times during the past month, not because she still wanted our marriage back but because she feared building another future without making peace with the first one. She explained that regret had followed her longer than she expected. After our divorce, she blamed herself for leaving too soon. Later she blamed me for not fighting harder. Eventually she realized both of us had been exhausted people trying to survive invisible pain. Sometimes there are no villains inside a broken relationship. There are only two wounded hearts losing each other one quiet day at a time. Her honesty forced me to confront my own failures. I confessed that after she left, I buried myself inside work because restoring furniture hurt less than restoring my own life. I avoided birthdays, anniversaries, and every place connected to us. Friends invited me to dinners and holidays, but loneliness often felt safer than risking another goodbye. Looking back, I realized I had spent years preserving memories instead of creating new ones. Our next stop was the hill overlooking the city where we once watched every Independence Day fireworks together. The benches had been replaced, new trees had grown taller, and the skyline looked different, yet the feeling remained strangely familiar. Maris removed a folded envelope from her handbag and handed it to me. Inside were dozens of letters I had written during our marriage but never mailed because I always believed there would be another opportunity to speak face to face. She confessed she had discovered them while cleaning our old storage unit after the divorce. She never opened them because she believed they belonged to me. Instead of throwing them away, she carried them for years, waiting for the right moment to return them. Holding those unopened letters felt heavier than holding any piece of furniture I had ever restored. They contained countless ordinary moments, small apologies, expressions of gratitude, dreams about growing old together, and promises that never reached the person they were meant for. I realized love often disappears not because feelings vanish but because words remain trapped inside hearts too proud or too afraid to speak. The afternoon sunlight slowly drifted west as we continued walking. Every street reminded us that life never waits for broken people to heal. New cafes had opened. Old buildings had disappeared. Teenagers now sat on the same fountain where we once planned impossible adventures together. The city had continued living while we remained trapped inside yesterday. Eventually we arrived at the cemetery where our unborn child rested beneath a small white stone engraved with a single word, forever. We stood there in complete silence. Years earlier, that loss had shattered both of us in different ways. I buried myself in work while Maris buried herself in isolation. Neither of us knew how to comfort the other because we barely understood our own grief. Looking at that tiny memorial after so many years, I finally understood something heartbreaking. We had never stopped loving each other. We had simply stopped knowing how to survive together after tragedy entered our lives. The wind carried the scent of fresh flowers across the peaceful hillside. Birds sang from nearby trees as though reminding us that life insists on continuing despite unimaginable pain. I placed my hand gently upon the cool stone and silently apologized, not only to the child we never raised but also to the younger versions of ourselves who believed love alone could solve every problem. Maris wiped away quiet tears before thanking me for coming. She admitted this visit mattered more than every other place we had seen because it allowed her to forgive herself. She had spent years believing the loss destroyed our marriage entirely. Now she finally accepted that grief was something we experienced together rather than something either of us caused. As the afternoon turned golden, we drove toward the beach where we had spent our honeymoon. Families laughed beneath colorful umbrellas while waves shimmered beneath bright daylight. We removed our shoes and walked barefoot across warm sand exactly as we had years before. The ocean looked unchanged despite everything our lives had become. Watching endless waves reminded me that nature understands something humans often forget. Every tide leaves, yet every tide eventually returns in another form. We sat watching children build sandcastles while parents encouraged them to keep trying each time the waves knocked everything down. The simple scene carried unexpected wisdom. Those children never cried because the ocean erased their castles. They simply smiled and built them again. Somewhere along adulthood, we stopped believing rebuilding is possible. Maris spoke warmly about the man she was about to marry. His name was Elias, a widower raising a young daughter who had taught her that families do not have to begin perfectly to become beautiful. There was peace in the way she described him. I recognized something I had not seen during our marriage. She no longer expected life to be flawless. She simply appreciated every ordinary moment it offered. Surprisingly, hearing about Elias did not fill me with jealousy. Instead, I felt gratitude. Not because I had stopped loving the woman sitting beside me, but because someone else had found the version of her that finally healed. Sometimes loving someone also means quietly celebrating the happiness they discover without you. As sunset approached, we returned to the small chapel where guests had already begun arriving. Soft golden light covered the garden surrounding the venue, making everything appear almost dreamlike. Maris thanked me for giving her this final day. She explained that revisiting our memories was never about reopening old wounds. It was about honoring a chapter that shaped both our lives instead of pretending it never existed. Before walking inside, she surprised me once more by asking for one final hug. Not the desperate embrace of two people trying to stop time, but the grateful embrace of two souls finally setting each other free. We stood quietly beneath the warm evening sky while distant church bells echoed across the gardens. For the first time in years, my heart no longer carried anger. Only gratitude remained. She disappeared through the chapel doors while I stayed outside watching guests smile, laugh, and celebrate another beginning. Instead of feeling abandoned, I felt strangely complete. Some stories are never meant to continue forever. Their purpose is to transform the people living inside them. I started walking home beneath the fading daylight instead of driving. Every familiar street now looked different. The memories remained, but they no longer hurt in the same way. They had become gentle reminders that even broken chapters can create beautiful endings. Several weeks later, I received a handwritten package in the mail. Inside was one photograph from our day together. On the back she had written that memories are not prisons unless we choose to live inside them forever. Beneath the photograph rested a tiny wooden heart carved from oak. I smiled because she remembered that oak had always been my favorite wood to restore. That single gift inspired me to begin something entirely new. I opened free weekend woodworking classes for children, widowers, single parents, veterans, and anyone carrying invisible pain. Together we repaired broken chairs, cracked tables, forgotten picture frames, and sometimes even ourselves. Every finished piece reminded us that damage does not erase value. It simply tells the story of survival. Months later, one elderly woman attended my workshop carrying an old rocking chair that had belonged to her late husband. As we restored it together, she whispered that she had not smiled since losing him 5 years earlier. Watching her rock gently in that repaired chair after we finished became one of the greatest rewards of my life. In helping others rebuild forgotten treasures, I unknowingly rebuilt my own future. Looking back now, I understand that Maris did not ask me to relive our memories because she wanted another chance at our marriage. She wanted both of us to stop carrying unfinished grief into tomorrow. That single day taught me forgiveness is not about forgetting the past. It is about refusing to let the past decide every tomorrow. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Heartline Stories so more people can discover stories that remind us healing is always possible.